Good. Hello, everyone. It is Friday, March 9th. This is the sig-aws bi-weekly meeting. We have a fairly light, well, we had a fairly light agenda, and now there's lots of great stuff appearing. Thank you, Arun, primarily, looks like. Looks like we have a couple of things, so we'll get right into it. There is one public service announcement which I wanted to make, which is that 110 is coming soon, and I think in this particular release, they're encouraging people to try it out test it out and give them earlier feedback. If you are inclined to do that, that would obviously be appreciated. But 110 should be landing fairly soon. I'm not aware of any huge AWS specific features that are landing in there. It looks like there's some block support for using AWS EBS volumes as block devices rather than as file systems. On that, the next item on the agenda is a discussion point. And actually, I'm going to hand over to Bob here because I think, Bob, you have a broader view of what's happening here, and maybe you can share that.
Sure. So, and this has been coming up in the last couple of big community meetings. There is been a pretty big effort led by Phil Whitrock to do a much more thorough job of defining the SIG, like a template for all of the SIGs. There's a short template and a long template, trying to get the SIGs to be, I would say, a bit more formal, but I may even say a lot more formal in terms of what they're responsible for and how decisions are made. One of the things that starts to become apparent if you read through the templates and start thinking about how to actually adapt the templates is the notion of more formal SIG membership. And this is something that Joe Beta addressed a little bit at the community meeting, but I've had this conversation with a couple of the other steering committee folks around the notion that we really do need to start getting a bit more formal about who and how we vote on things, especially when they're contentious. So it's one of those things that doesn't matter until it matters. And a lot of the times the informal process has been working fine. Some of you may remember that when the steering committee was voted in to begin with, that it was a little odd because it wasn't really clear who and how would even get to vote at that level. So sorting out voting is a pretty important thing, and we need to work on it. So for us, that means we're going to have to figure out how we figure out who the members are and how we actually record that and make that a more formal thing. I think that let's say I haven't heard, there's nothing formal here, but just in terms of discussions, I think it's pretty clear that and this should not be a surprise, that the steering committee view is that voting on the project should really be a contribution based. In other words, it's a dev contributor vote, not an end user vote. And I think, Justin, you and I talked a little bit about this earlier in the week. I think, sig-aws is probably a lot heavier in terms of end users relative to some of the other SIGs, certainly relative to a couple of the other SIGs that I attend or have been involved in regularly, which are very contributor heavy, and it would probably never even come up. So I think, one of the things we want to make sure we do is not let there be any surprises, make sure everybody has a chance to talk about it. And we can always take an alternative back to the steering committee. We get some self-determination here.
Yeah.
Comments?
I mean, I have an obvious one, which is I love that our SIG has a broad community. I feel like we develop based on even if you don't code, telling us what works and what doesn't is a valuable contribution, right? It's almost harder to know what to code than it is to code it up sometimes. The coding is the easy bit at the end of the discussion, as it were. And so I don't want to have a Kubernetes community. I don't think we should have a Kubernetes community that is entirely Go programmers with no particular insight into what actually happens in the real world. I guess the one question I have is what are what are the things that we vote on? Is it just steering committee? Is it other things?
Good one. One of the important topics, which I think is next on our agenda, is to talk about subprojects. So how do we approve and agree that the SIG is going to take on responsibility of a subproject or create new subprojects based on discussion? So that's clearly one that the member group would vote on. Let me endorse your point of view there, Justin, that it's really important for us to be working with users and be getting good feedback, and we really want to make sure that happens. I would be completely, I would endorse the notion that if someone's showing up and giving us lots of feedback, that is about a highly valuable contribution. I think that the place I would be a little uncomfortable is like just showing up and lurking on the SIG every week is probably not quite, wouldn't for me cross the bar. So I don't know how we quite do that. But you know, I think a informal way to just say, hey, yeah, great, you've been showing up and giving us feedback and participating. We can be very liberal in terms of how we grant membership, I guess I'm saying.
And Bob, are you suggesting, as a person who shows up and lurks, you know, maybe there's membership is broader, but then voting rights is limited to the people actually contributing? Is that an option?
Yeah. So at the last community meeting, I asked this question, and Brian Grant was very specific about it. And you know, the degree to which his opinion is shared by the steering committee on sort of an official basis, I couldn't say, but he clearly is one of the, you know, really key people on the project. And his view was that like a 2-level way to view this, like kind of membership, which is sort of everybody that's interested, and then, you know, contributors, loosely defined. I would add loosely defined contribution would be the ones that would actually vote on projects. So I don't know, does that seem fair to you, or what's your reaction? Just give me your visceral reaction to that.
Everyone's or mine specifically. I mean, I don't feel the need to vote on most things. I'm here to understand where things are going. You know, there may be a point where I do have a strong opinion, but that hasn't happened yet, and I haven't been here all that long. But I think that sounds like a good balance.
Very good, then.
Bob, I understand that I understand that perspective, and I understand where Brian's coming from. Like you said, I would assume that like sig-aws and the other user groups that are more cloud defined, you know, bare metal as well. You know, this is more a user group that is of users, not of developers, to Justin's point. So I'm wondering if we'd be a little bit more unique in that manner.
I think that's exactly the point Justin was making. You know, here's the thing that I think would not be good for us. You know, someone shows up and lurks, and then a critical vote comes up, and suddenly they're voting, and they've never said anything or participated, and just because they're showing up, they get a say. You know, I don't think that's really the basis on which projects like Kubernetes kind of survive and do well.
It seems to me like the real issue is how do we measure skin in the game to some degree, right? Now, if you're talking about loosely defining contributions, and that's like if somebody's coming in and is regularly creating issues or having some kind of voice online, to me that seems like sufficient contribution to merit some amount of say.
I would agree. I mean, I think opening an issue is, I would say at this point, opening an issue is sufficient, right? That's real participation.
But we do though want to be careful of what we incentivize, right? Like if we,
yeah, I know.
I don't want a million issues open because like it's some sort of prize for opening an issue that you get like voting rights.
I know.
That is not fun. So
lots of opportunities here for unintended consequences.
I mean, I guess I guess we get some more feedback from the. I don't know if there's any other SIGs that are in the same.
I will make it a point to reach out to a couple of the other SIGs in this boat and just see what their thoughts are on it.
That'd be great. Thank you.
And Chris, I think your call outs on the SIGs that are likely to have a heavier dose than others in terms of sort of end user participation is the right guideline there.
sig-aws is another one, right?
sig-aws, yeah.
They probably have a lot of people around in some capacity that may or may not, that have different levels of participation.
Excellent. Good point.
More so.
I think in the meantime, we can kind of proceed on the informal basis of we would accept the sub-project as long as nobody really objects. This is sort of the modified lazy consensus thing, right?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the grounds to proceed on. And certainly, like, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. We started with a project that I hope no one will object to, but I would hope that most of our projects are going to be fairly uncontentious. And so, yes, if people have objections, then it's interesting to know what those objections are. At least to me.
Sounds pretty good. So should we move on to that?
Yeah. So I was just going to say we talked about this briefly, I think 2 weeks ago. A proposed first sub-project is an implementation of the API server. API server can now support encryption so that your data in etcd is encrypted with a secret. There is a plugin, a gRPC API to provide the encryption keys using the different mechanisms. There's going to be a GCE KMS provider. The proposal is to have an AWS KMS provider so that your keys would live in AWS KMS. We talked about that briefly 2 weeks ago. Robin Percy stepped up as well to be my proposed co-owner. Anyone else is also very welcome to contribute, of course, in any level they want to. But we are proceeding with that. And if anyone objects, then I would like to, or if anyone has any reasons or concerns, then I'd love to hear those.
Did you open a? It seems sort of like we should at least do like a pull request or something that people can +1. I don't know. Is that? I suppose this is the governance stuff again.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. There is a very brief doc that I circulated to like Robin and I think Chris as well. I'm happy to share it with anyone. But yeah, pull request would be good. I honestly, we're still figuring out the process, so
right.
I think the biggest we have to figure out a name. So
naming and cache invalidation, right?
Exactly. AWS-encryption-provider is a name I threw out there. I don't know whether that's too broad or too narrow or whatever, but it seems like a name. I think we get the AWS-prefix by virtue of being sig-AWS. I don't know if anyone that works at AWS might have an issue with that, but it will be github.com/kubernetes-sigs/AWS-subproject name.
Right. I have no objection to the AWS part.
Yeah, it seems like
the snarky side of me says that this should actually be like, an encrypted string, but that's going to be really hard for people to remember. So.
Noted. Yes, I think if so, I think that's the two action items are. If anyone has an objection to this notion of this being our first sub-project, then please say something, or if you're not comfortable saying something here, then feel free to reach out to me personally. And otherwise, we will be progressing with the assumed lazy consensus of the SIG, and if it turns out we need formal consensus, then we will put it to a vote of our undetermined membership.
Right. Cool. I think we had to do a pull request to get, I think the last time we ran across this, Aaron actually went and did the created something for us. So I think you may have to actually have to do the pull request anyway to get someone on the steering committee to actually create the bits we need.
The good news is that Chris Nova has achieved this in SIG cluster lifecycle, so I can ask her how she achieved that and follow the same path, which makes my life a lot easier.
Cool.
As long as everyone here is on board, I'll give everyone like 5 seconds to speak up. Okay, that's good. All right, I was hoping it wasn't going to be too contentious, so that is good. And yes, we are still figuring out the process, and it may come back to haunt us for another week, but hopefully we have consensus on that. So shall we move on? I think Arun has an item, which is the chaos toolkit, because we need more chaos. Arun, are you there?
Chaos is always good, isn't it? Chaos brings some normalcy to our lifestyle. Right, fantastic. So there is this, I think, a non-profit or a company, that builds. I've not looked into how this project was started, but there's this project called as Chaos Toolkit. I had a chat with them earlier this week, and they're very interested in actually working with AWS to figure out how Chaos Toolkit, how chaos engineering could particularly be applied in a Kubernetes land. So I had my first discussion with them, I think Monday or Tuesday, I guess. And now there is an issue open in the Kubernetes workshop that we have built and delivered at KubeCon and reInvent. And that pull request should be coming out soon, hopefully, sometime next week. So the idea is that will show essentially once you have done a deployment, how can you introduce chaos engineering as part of this to make sure that it is robust? I don't know how the chaos would be introduced as part of it, but well, this is Kubernetes and it's going to be related to AWS. So I thought it would be relevant to bring up the topic over here. What I can do is I can actually share the PR the issue that was filed this morning. We talked about it a few days back, but I can drop the link in the chat window. So take a look at this one, and this at least shows what's happening. So I would say follow this issue. The PR would be sent against this issue, and once this comes along, then I think this would be a good piece of information for SIG AWS to be aware of at least.
Quick question. There are two, I think, fairly distinct ways to apply chaos engineering in a Kubernetes system. One is to apply it at the application level. I don't know, killing off pods would be an example of doing something like that. The other would be to apply it at the Kubernetes control plane level, killing off etcd cluster bits or, API servers and so forth. Is there a kind of direction that this swings? In other words, is it viewed as kind of application level tooling or infrastructure level tooling?
I think this is more application level tooling, although I will wait for the PR to come through to see what it looks like really. So, right. I didn't read through their website, and I just had a 30-minute discussion with these guys. But once the PR comes along, I want to always start with a simple hello world, see what's possible. And once we understand that, then the idea would be to kind of let this evolve in a little bit broader chapter by itself. And of course, encompass, how can we introduce, start with a simple deployment, for example, but then start killing the pods left and right. And then, of course, start killing nodes, start killing etcd, because I think that will only help, and then get something very AWS specific and see, if we can kill some artifacts over there. So I think there are different levels, not just the application and the infrastructure, but because we are talking about AWS, maybe look at some AWS aspects as well over there. So I'll be working with these guys over hopefully the next few weeks to figure out what the Kubernetes on AWS story would look like, particularly from the chaos engineering perspective.
This is cool stuff.
It is really, yeah.
Yeah.
And this will, the way I'm looking to design this is, definitely first at the app level, because that is more critical to begin with, so that we can figure out what. Hopefully, some recommendations will come out of this exercise. That okay, when you're designing your app or when you're creating your Kubernetes manifest, here are 3 things that you should do so that there are chaos proof essentially. So first at the app level, then second at this is how you should design your cluster, and then third is if there's something AWS specific. So the way I'm looking at it is the first 2 aspects of application and Kubernetes would be more generically applicable to the other cloud providers as well, and then the third one would be definitely specific to AWS. But I think this would be a good thought leadership role for us, that let SIG AWS kind of lead with this, and then maybe once it's in a good shape, then we can actually talk about it at one of the Kubernetes community meetings.
That is very cool. And I know there are some E2E tests today on, well, I guess they only run on GCP today, but they do some disruption. I'm not sure the nature of the disruption, and it would be great to have more AWS testing that does similar chaos.
That is a great call out. Especially around HA testing, we need a lot more of this. My kind of inclination is that as soon as you get into anything at the infrastructure layer, it has all the cloud provider issues. Like if you're going to kill a VM, that's going to be as part of your chaos toolkit. That's clearly going to be a cloud specific kind of operation. If it's only at the application level, this might actually be a better project for the sig-aws potentially. But I feel like we have a really big gap on the kind of infrastructure testing side that this would be great for.
I agree. And the way I'm looking at it is, let's start. I mean, we have already started working on this effort. Let's see, how it evolves. And if the discussion needs to a different SIG or at a different level, I'm completely open for that. But I think let's put a stake in the ground, see what needs to be done, and have a formal chaos testing as part of Kubernetes.
There's some great, there definitely are some things that we could definitely do specific to AWS. Like I think it'd be hilarious to null root 169.254 and maybe null root the EC2 API, or introduce packet loss on there. There are definitely some things we could do on AWS which would be funny.
Right. And so if you guys have any ideas in the sense of, Justin, your ideas are brilliant, and Bob, your classification is also very relevant. So if you guys have any specific ideas on what you would like to see as part of this chaos toolkit, you have the issue in the chat window. I would definitely say add any scenarios over there. My first PR is going to be relevant to just a simple deployment and adding chaos to it, because I like to start simple and crawl, walk, and run. So once I crawl, then I'll be able to say, okay, now add more scenarios. But feel free to add your scenarios or use cases or thought processes that we should cover this as part of the chaos toolkit. I'm all up for it.
So this kind of goes back into the work that I've been doing with HA testing, Arun. I think that would fall in really good if we can kill the active controller manager, and the active scheduler has that failover, kill an etcd node, stuff like that. I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, very cool. So Chris, if you have an issue that can be linked here, that'll be awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Well, the next item on the agenda is also, Arun, your Kubernetes app packaging.
Yeah. So let me actually share my screen here. And I'm going to share my desktop and share screen here. So here's a project that I've been working on for the past few weeks. Essentially, in this project, what I have is 3 services. And I'm talking about a web app service that receives a request from the client, which then talks to a greeting and a name service and returns a response back. So essentially, it shows 3 simple microservices and how they work with each other to return a response back to the client. Now, these services, if you look at it, are deployed using Docker, just a plain Docker Compose, Docker Swarm, ECS, Kubernetes, and Lambda. And if I get into, and the idea is to deploy the exact same application, 3 microservices, using different compute options on AWS. If I get into K8s, basically, now in Kubernetes, I have a standalone manifest, of course. So I can click on, say, standalone here. And here is my manifest.yaml. And it just says, okay, deployment and service, pretty straightforward. Then the second deployment model is Helm. So, okay, we need to create the Helm charts. So now I have the Helm charts here, chart YAML, values, templates, I got stuff here. Not using some templating, but not a whole lot, but I'm sure it could be improved and made much better. But this is essentially a Helm chart. And then last but not the least, I have a Cassonnet application as well. This is pretty brand new, literally got it working yesterday. But what I'm looking at here is, from Kubernetes perspective, we got standalone manifest, Helm charts, and Cassonnet applications up and running for the exact same application. So 2 questions. First is, are people seeing any other application packaging model that are prominent or that they would like to see here?
I think in terms of application packaging, this looks pretty good. I think the rough edges are that, which I don't think as a community we've sorted out, but it's the notion of operators, and that you can have a Helm chart to install a database like MySQL or something, but just installing it is not really quite enough. You actually need to automate all the runbooks around it, and trying to understand but operators are also presently this sort of custom thing that may use Helm. Like an operator might use Helm as part of what it does, but there's this, I don't know, sort of ambiguous packaging about what is it really and how does it work. So it's not really, it's just more a general commentary, because this is something that topic is something I've been doing a lot of head scratching on lately, and this seemed like a good time to mention it.
But would you use an operator to deploy an application like this?
I think the answer is yes, you might, because generally the idea is that an operator probably needs to do some deployment, check on something, is maybe going to be doing managing the upgrade to do deployments and so forth. I don't know. Maybe this is a rat hole, but it's definitely something I've been scratching my head around, which is kind of standardization of the
I understand
setup.
I mean, typically what I've seen is operators are used if there is some sort of a state involved, etcd operator, that you want to make sure it's managed and all those things. But these are all stateless services. Would you still consider the option of using an operator for it?
Good question. I guess it depends on within this context how things like upgrades are managed. And I suppose in a lot of cases it's really being managed by effectively that management is done by whatever CI or CD system.
Correct.
However the CD system is being used, whereas operators kind of interfere a little bit with that model, maybe in a positive way, maybe not. Anyway, I'll sort of withdraw the comment because I don't think there's anything actionable here on that front.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
But other than Helm, Cassonnet, and standalone manifest, are people seeing any other deployment model for deploying Kubernetes applications on AWS or in general with Kubernetes?
Certainly, a lot of people do manual templating, I think, and things of that nature. I think if you can get away with it, which it seems like you have, then I think that's great. So these are really great ones to start with, in my opinion.
Okay, cool. So when you say manual templating, you mean writing a manifest like this, and then using something like this, right?
The one I see all the time is templating of the Docker tag, right? So you tag your Docker image with the Git SHA, for example, is what I do personally, and you then have to tag it, right? So you don't use it. But Cassonnet is a tool to address that. There are a plethora of others that we're talking about, ways to make that more in the standard, Brian grants declarative application management is an ongoing proposal, which is, in my opinion, very good. But I think the three you've got there are the bright three to start with.
Okay, perfect. Sounds good. So now, one of the things, as we look at different deployment pipelines, we'll definitely have one of the options is to, as part of the deployment pipeline, you have to patch the manifest. So that'll automatically be taken care of. So definitely looking at that. And on the deployment pipeline side, we are looking at Jenkins as the one options, code pipeline is another one, and possibly Spinnaker. So before I get into the deployment pipeline, so my ask would be if people can take a look at this, see if these help charts or these Cassandra charts or standalone manifests, do they look good or do they need to be improved or worked upon in any sense? I'm always happy to get feedback or make any changes over there. So that's one. I think that was my second point actually. So I just wanted to kind of share that I've been looking at these, essentially taking these applications, deploying them as a Kubernetes, deploying them on a Kubernetes cluster running on AWS. How the cluster is created is completely immaterial at this point in time.
Yeah, I think this is great. I think it's like having this view of how to, suppose you have a Kubernetes cluster, what now, right? That's an important thing. And I think this is a great start. And I don't think this will be the end. Like, I don't think it will be like you write this and you never revisit it, because I imagine this will be something that we iterate on a lot over the next couple of years. But yeah, it's great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a matter of fact, the way I'm looking at this is, this is scheduled as a 3-hour tutorial at an event in Paris in next month. So essentially in those 3 hours, I need to talk about how my applications are designed, how I create the Docker image, and the full table of contents is here. So it talks about how do I build the Docker image, how do I deploy the application to Kubernetes, the different ways, how do I do Fargate or ECS and Lambda. And for each one of those, essentially, I'm talking about my local dev, test, debug environment, my monitoring environment, and that's sort of my next topic as well. But how do I do my pipelines? So I'm looking at Jenkins, Spinnaker, and Code Pipeline, sort of the 3 common options. So one of the big gaps that I see for Kubernetes in general is very heavy ops-centric, and we don't do a lot of coaching around app development. This was one of the comments that Adrian actually gave me last year as well. So that's something that I've taken up as my mission, and that's sort of the effort in that direction.
Very cool. I saw Bob has a question about, does anyone use Compose with a K, or is it a transition training tool for Docker users new to Kubernetes? I don't have an answer for that. I don't know if anyone else has a view.
Well, I think that's a good point, though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at maybe that is another application packaging format for deploying Kubernetes application. So standalone, Helm, Cassandra, and Docker Compose maybe. I've not seen very many people using Docker Compose to deploy to a Kubernetes cluster, but I think it's about education and being, a stack or a application framework agnostic, saying, okay, here are 4 choices. We're laying out all the cards, and you pick what works in your environment.
I was specifically talking. So there's Compose, Docker Compose, and then there's this other project which is Compose spelled with a K, very confusing. But I think the idea was be able to, and I haven't actually used it myself, but I think the notion is you can take a Compose formatted file and use K with a Compose, and it'll sort of translate it into pod specs and other things that you need to do in order to deploy it.
Oh, cool.
And again, it seems like kind of a cool thing, but I've never run into anyone that does it for anything other than just as kind of a learning tool. But I might have completely the wrong perspective on it. So.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point actually. So, but I'll take a look at it and see how people are finding it useful.
And it looks like Dan also put a link to kubepack.com in the chat. Ask whether anyone had seen it.
So I think what would be really helpful is if people can actually file issues for this. I'm filing an issue for the Docker Compose already. I'll file one for the Compose with a K. And the third tool that Justin just talked about, it would be great if you can file an issue on the repo.
And I put a link to the repo in the agenda minutes thing.
Yep.
Cool.
All right.
And then the final item currently on the agenda is also your Rune X-ray integration, which I think is actually good because it brings us around to, I presume, what will be sub-projects again. So this, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so before I get here, so I'll file this issue later, but let me open up a new tab here. So I spent a significant amount of time yesterday with the AWS X-Ray team. Because one of the tools, one of the good parts of X-Ray is it really allows you to track across your multiple applications or multiple microservices, so to say, allows you to trace the call, and if you can dig into, like, it shows you a very nice visual diagram. So let me actually bring up something in a second.
For people that don't know, can I confirm AWS X-Ray is sort of an open tracing backend? Is that right?
It is not compliant to open tracing. Open tracing, the format is not that rich, but we are working on making it to be open tracing compliant, because the payload that goes exchange between different, X-Ray daemon and the X-Ray agents is far richer. So we've been working with the open tracing team to make it compliant.
Is it the same space as open tracing?
Very much, very much. Yeah, but it's a managed service by AWS. So essentially what you do is, and I'll walk through the programming model as well, but once you have configured it, then what you see on the screen is this is a client, this goes to my web app, and this goes to my name container and a greeter container, and it's showing the service. And at any point of time, what I'm showing you is a slide deck, but if I double click on a particular circle, it'll dig deeper, so I can see a full view of the application, and I can slowly start digging deeper into the application and start showing me traces where it starts highlighting what are the potential bottlenecks in the application. So that is really cool. So the part that I worked with the X-Ray team yesterday is on how to get this up and running on Kubernetes cluster. I already worked with somebody from one of the solution architects who basically showed how do you do application tracing on Kubernetes with AWS X-Ray. Hold on 1 second. I have to finish this and we'll go. Then the blog shows basically how do you set this up. So I'm trying to mimic all of that in the repo here. So if I go to my tab here, here's a Docker file. The Docker file says, how do you create a Docker image for X-Ray? Then it says, how do you deploy it as a daemon set? I got the daemon set here. Then we can actually go to the application, say my services and greeting and my source file. And if I look at my actual source code here, and if I look at my greeting endpoint, there it says, okay, how do you add X-Ray imports and how do you can begin and end segment? So I'm hoping, I want a fully functional example. There is one which exists for Node.js, but I want to make something for Java as well. So once that sample is up and running, then I'll be again happy to share the link with the rest of the folks, because now essentially you can deploy your Kubernetes application on AWS, just integrate it with X-Ray, and then maybe in a future meeting, and hopefully in the next week or so, I should be able to show a live working example on how these things work and show actually complete drill down.
That looks very cool. To what extent is this something you do in your pods, and to what extent is it something that we have to support in addition to stuff that goes inside the pod? Yeah, so there is no sidecar or anything running like that. Essentially, X-Ray runs as a daemon set, which is sort of, so now all I'm doing is in my application, I add X-Ray begins segment and subsegment. So I have to instrument my application. Once you instrument your application, and then depending upon the language that you're using, so if I look at greeting, then I look at, say, startup bean, I need to have one singleton bean, which will say, okay, go talk to today's ECS plugin, and I'm giving a lot of feedback to the X-Ray team that, guys, we are piggybacking on ECS plugin today, but I've given feedback to the X-Ray team already that I want a first-class support for Kubernetes in X-Ray. So I would like this to be a Kubernetes plugin instead. So essentially, you can set up your X-Ray as part of your application. Say, you are basically now talking to the daemon. And if I look back at my apps, and if I look at my Kubernetes and my Helm chart, and I look at my templates, and I look at my greeting deployment, all I have is just a AWS X-Ray daemon address here, which points to the X-Ray service default, which is basically how my X-Ray daemon is set up. So you need to
specify this environment variable because that's what X-ray daemon, is where it started. And then your service is started, which is the X-ray-service.default name. And then you need to instrument your pod. And that's about it. Those are sort of the three components. Now, I'm having issues that I was not able to see the traces. So the X-ray engineering team is helping me out to figure this part out. But I think once I get this part working, I'll be happy to give a live demo of this in a future SIG meeting.
I think that'd be cool. I think it'd be also interesting to see, whether this turns into another sub-project for the AWS SIG, and yeah, looks awesome.
Yeah, I think we should look at maybe not just X-ray, but essentially different tracing opportunities where AWS X-ray could be one of the ways, and then we should look at it. Hey, by the way, how do I look at, say, pick any other tracing project and integrate it in here?
Right. I mean, it might not be an AWS sub-project, but yes.
Yeah. But I think there are a lot of fun things happening on this side of it. I'm looking forward to have this up and running in my environment.
Very cool. Thank you, Arun. I don't know if anyone else has anything they want to mention on that or on any other topic.
Actually, I do. One more. So I'm going to show this one here. I would love to submit this talk with anybody in SIG AWS. Basically, it says Kubernetesize your Java application. Is take the same application that I showed earlier, but it walks you through different phases of how do you take your Java application, convert it into a Kubernetes application, manage it, monitor it, deployment pipeline it, service visibility, all of those. So this is purely from Kubernetes running on an AWS cluster. So I think it'll be a fun abstract to collaborate on this. So I'm looking, if people are interested in co-submitting this talk at some of the upcoming conferences. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Well, reach out to me, ping me on Slack, or shoot me a mail if you guys are interested in collaborating on this.
I love that it says use an Alexa skill to scale the application. That seems very fun and dangerous.
Yeah. Not that you will do that in production, but it's a fun thing.
You might do it in production.
Yeah, why not?
I think the linkage between that notion and chaos testing is pretty strong.
Alexa, kill my pod. Yeah. Well, I'm always looking for ways to collaborate with different people in the SIG. So if you guys think of any other ways by which we can collaborate with you, always happy to hear ideas.
That's awesome.
Okay, that's all I had.
So unless anyone else has any other topics, I think we can call it. Speak now or enjoy your
Sounds
Friday.
Good. Happy Friday.
Happy weekend, everybody.
You guys.